I'm standing in my own kitchen, holding a phone that isn't mine, watching my husband's face drain of color as he realizes what I've discovered. The morning light streams through our bay window, illuminating the stack of printed emails, text messages, and bank statements I've arranged on our marble countertop with the precision of a prosecutor presenting her case. 7 months, I say quietly, setting down the phone. 7 months you've been telling me you were working late at the firm. Instead, I smile. 3 months earlier. The first red flag wasn't dramatic. It was mundane, which made it all the more damning. David had always been methodical about his phone, face down on the nightstand, charging cord positioned just so. But that Tuesday in March, I noticed he'd started taking it with him to the bathroom. Every time. I am a litigation support specialist at Morrison & Associates. I have spent 15 years of my career learning to spot inconsistencies in human behavior, to follow digital breadcrumbs, to build airtight cases from fragments of evidence. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd need to use those same skills on my own marriage. The toothbrush thing was next. David had started brushing his teeth twice in the evenings, once after dinner and again before bed. A small thing. Most wives wouldn't notice. But I'm not most wives. I notice when someone's preparing to be closer to another person than they've been to me in months. "How was your day?" I asked him that evening, watching as he adjusted his tie in our bedroom mirror. He was dressing differently too. Crisp white shirts, instead of the blue ones I'd been buying him for 12 years. Cologne applied, with more care than he'd shown since our honeymoon. "Same as always," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Mackenzie case is keeping me buried. Might be another late night." The Mackenzie case had closed 6 weeks ago. I'd seen the final billing summary cross my desk. I said nothing. I have learned that silence is often more powerful than accusations. Week 2. I started my own investigation the way I would any other case. With financial records. David might be a skilled corporate attorney, but he'd gotten sloppy with our joint accounts. The charges painted a clear picture. 2 dinners at Chez Laurent on nights he'd claimed to be working through Chinese takeout at the office. A $347 charge at La Perla on a Thursday afternoon when he'd supposedly been in depositions. Hotel parking fees. Wine that cost more than our monthly electricity bill. The wine was particularly insulting. David had told me for years that expensive wine was a waste of money, that he couldn't tell the difference between a $30 bottle and a $300 one. Apparently, his palate had become more sophisticated when he wasn't drinking with his wife. I created a spreadsheet. Date, time, amount, merchant. David's claimed location. The pattern emerged like a photograph developing in a dark room. Every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 4 months. Regular as clockwork. Predictable as a man who thought he was clever. My sister Rachel called while I was updating the data. "You sound tired," she said. "Everything okay?" "Just work stuff," I replied. Which was true in a way. This was work. The most important case I'd ever built. "How's David? Still putting in those crazy hours?" I looked at my computer screen. According to his credit card, David had paid for valet parking at the Meridian Hotel yesterday at 2:17 p.m. According to his calendar, which he'd left open on our home computer, he'd been in client meetings until 5. "He's very dedicated," I said. Week 3, the photography. I hired Marcus Chen from Chen Investigations on a Thursday. Marcus was a former police detective who'd made a name for himself in divorce proceedings, and his reputation for discretion was impeccable. More importantly, he was thorough. "I need to know everything," I told him in his sparse downtown office. "Where he goes, who he sees, how long he stays. I need documentation." Marcus studied my face with the calm assessment of someone who'd seen this story before. "Mrs. Hartwell, are you prepared for what we might find?" I thought about that question. Was I prepared to have my suspicions confirmed? Was I prepared to watch my marriage dissolve into evidence and exhibits? Was I prepared to discover that the man I'd shared a bed with for 16 years had been sharing other beds for 7 months? "I'm prepared to know the truth," I said. Marcus's photos arrived via encrypted email 3 days later. David and a woman I didn't recognize entering the Meridian Hotel at 2:43 p.m. on Tuesday. The same woman leaving David's BMW in the parking garage of her downtown apartment building at 6:22 p.m. on Thursday. David's hand on her lower back as they walked into Romano's, the Italian restaurant where he'd proposed to me 17 years ago. The woman was younger, not dramatically so, but enough that it mattered. Blonde where I was dark, petite where I was tall. She had a delicate laugh that I could somehow hear in the silent photographs, throwing her head back in the way I remember doing when David used to tell me jokes that were actually funny. Her name was Jessica Moreau. She was 32 years old, a marketing coordinator at Brennan and Associates, and according to Marcus's research, recently divorced. She drove a white Audi that her ex-husband was still paying for. She lived in a loft apartment that cost more than most people's mortgages. She had expensive tastes and, apparently, no qualms about dating married men. I studied every photograph with the detached focus I'd brought to every case I'd ever worked. David's face in those images wasn't the face I'd been seeing at home. This David smiled with his whole face, leaned in when she spoke, touched her with the casual intimacy of someone who'd forgotten he belonged to someone else. This David looked happy. Week 4, the surveillance. I began my own surveillance operation. Not to catch them. Marcus had already done that thoroughly, but to understand the scope of what I was dealing with. How long had this been going on? How serious was it? How many other people knew? The answers were more devastating than the affair itself. According to David's personal emails, which I accessed using a password I'd watched him type 100 times, this had been going on for 9 months, not 7. They'd met at a legal conference in Denver, where David had been presenting on corporate merger law. She'd approached him after his presentation, told him she'd found his insights fascinating. The early emails were flirtatious, but professional. Then came the late-night phone calls, the accidental meetings for coffee, the progression from emotional affair to physical betrayal. I could track it like a timeline of my marriage's destruction. What made it worse was reading David's version of our relationship. To hear him tell it, I was a frigid workaholic who'd lost interest in our marriage years ago. I was controlling, demanding, impossible to please. I had become a stranger in my own life story. The David in these emails complained about my cooking, my hair, my habit of reading legal briefs in bed. He painted me as someone who'd given up on romance, who preferred spreadsheets to conversation, who'd turned our home into a law library instead of a sanctuary. Some of it stung because it contained grains of truth. I had been working more. I had been tired. I had, perhaps, taken our stability for granted. But I had never lied to him. I had never betrayed him. I had never made him into a villain in someone else's love story. Week 5, the plan. I have always believed that the best revenge is not emotional but strategic. Anger makes you sloppy. Pain makes you reactive. But careful planning, that makes you powerful. I began with our assets. As a litigation support specialist, I knew exactly how to trace financial movements, how to protect accounts, and how to build a paper trail that would hold up in court. David might be a good attorney, but I was better at understanding how information flowed through systems. Our house was in both names, but I'd put down the down payment from my inheritance. Our investment accounts were joint, but I could trace which funds had come from my bonuses versus his salary. David had been generous with Jessica. Flowers, jewelry, dinners that cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. But he'd been generous with my money. The Meridian Hotel charges were particularly galling. 16 different dates over 4 months, averaging $3 per visit. David had been conducting his affair on our MasterCard, literally billing his betrayal to our joint account, while telling me we needed to cut back on our vacation budget. I screenshot everything. Bank statements, hotel receipts, credit card charges, restaurant bills. I organized them chronologically, cross-referenced them with David's calendar, built a comprehensive financial record of his infidelity. If he wanted to drain our accounts to fund his midlife crisis, he'd learn that every dollar had a digital trail. Next, I called my own attorney, Sarah Morrison from Morrison & Associates, who'd been my mentor for 8 years and knew exactly what kind of case I could build. I need you to prepare something, I told her, sliding the folder across her mahogany desk. But I don't want you to file it yet. Sarah flipped through my documentation with the methodical attention of someone who understood that divorce was war, and I just handed her enough ammunition to win it decisively. This is extremely thorough work, she said. When do you want to serve him? I don't, I said. Not yet. I want him to serve himself. Week 7. The setup. I created a new email account, and sent myself a message from David's business account, copied his writing style perfectly, and forwarded it to Jessica Moreau at her work address. The message suggested that David was planning to leave me for her, that he'd already started moving assets, and that she should start thinking about their future together. Then I waited. Jessica, as I'd hoped, called David immediately. I know this because I was listening from our home office when his phone rang that Thursday evening. David's side of the conversation was a masterclass in panic management. "No, I never sent that email," he said, pacing in our living room while I pretended to read briefs in the kitchen. "Someone must have hacked my account. No. I'm not ready to leave Claire. We talked about this. We need to be patient." Patient. As if they were waiting for the right season to destroy my life. The conversation lasted 47 minutes. I timed it. By the end, David sounded exhausted, and Jessica, based on his responses to her questions, sounded suspicious. "I don't know how someone would know about us," he kept saying. "No, Claire doesn't know. She would have said something." But now Jessica was paranoid, and paranoid people make mistakes. Week 8, the unraveling. The mistake came on a Tuesday. Jessica, worried that someone was watching them, insisted on meeting David somewhere new, somewhere public, somewhere safe. She chose the coffee shop 2 blocks from my office. I was sitting in the corner booth with my laptop when they walked in at 2:15 p.m. I watched David's face scan the room nervously, watched Jessica clutch his arm like a woman who'd finally realized she was dating someone else's husband in a city where everyone might know it. They ordered their coffee and sat near the window. From where I was sitting, I could see David trying to calm her down, could watch him reach across the table to take her hand. I could see the moment when she pulled away. "Someone knows," she was saying, her voice carrying in the way voices do when people think they're being private. "Someone sent that email for a reason." David looked around the coffee shop again. His eyes passed right over me. A woman with dark hair pulled back, glasses on, typing on a laptop like dozens of other professionals on their afternoon break. I was invisible to him now, as I'd been invisible at home for months. "Maybe it's time," Jessica said, and I watched David's face change. "Time for what?" "Time for you to make a choice." I finished my latte and left before I could hear his answer. I didn't need to. The look on his face had told me everything. Week 9, the recording David chose, he chose Jessica, chose to ask me for a divorce, chose to spin it as mutual decision based on our growing apart. He chose to sit me down on a Sunday evening in our living room, the room where we'd celebrated 16 anniversaries, and explain that he thought we should separate. "We've both been unhappy for a while," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Maybe it's time to admit that we want different things." I let him talk. I let him explain how we'd become roommates instead of partners, how the spark had gone out of our marriage, how we deserve to find happiness with people who truly understood us. I let him paint our divorce as an act of mutual compassion. What David didn't know was that I'd installed a voice recorder app on my phone 3 weeks earlier. What David didn't know was that every word of his carefully rehearsed speech was being captured in crystal clear audio. What David didn't know was that I was going to let him hang himself. "I think you're right," I said when he finished. "We do deserve happiness." The relief on his face was almost comical. "Really? You're not upset?" "I'm sad," I said, which was true. "But I'm not surprised. I felt the distance between us too." We talked for another hour about logistics, about splitting assets amicably, about remaining friends. David was so pleased with how mature and reasonable I was being. He complimented my grace under pressure. He said he'd always admired my ability to stay calm in difficult situations. He had no idea how difficult things were about to become. Week 10, the revelation. I waited until David had moved out of our bedroom and into the guest room before I made my move. He'd been sleeping there for 6 days, claiming he needed space to think, when I knocked on the door at 11 p.m. on a Thursday. "Can we talk?" I asked. David was lying on top of the covers, fully dressed, his phone in his hand, probably texting Jessica about how smoothly everything was going, how reasonable his soon-to-be ex-wife was being about their mutual decision. "Of course," he said, sitting up. "What's on your mind?" I handed him a manila folder. "What's this?" "Evidence," I said. David opened the folder, and his face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, fear, and finally, resignation. Marcus's photographs were organized chronologically, each one labeled with date, time, and location. Bank statements highlighted David's expenditures: hotel receipts, restaurant bills, email printouts. "Claire? 7 months," I said. "Actually 9, but who's counting?" David's hands were shaking as he flipped through the documentation. "Where did you get these?" "I'm a litigation support specialist, David. Finding evidence is what I do." He looked up at me then, and for the first time in months, I had his complete attention. "Are you going to... What are you planning to do with this?" "That depends on you." I sat down on the edge of the bed, close enough that he couldn't avoid looking at me, far enough away that he couldn't mistake this for intimacy. "Here's what's going to happen," I said. "You're going to call Jessica right now, and you're going to end it. Completely. No contact, no closure conversation, no romantic goodbye. You're going to tell her that you've decided to work on your marriage, and that you made a mistake." "Claire, I'm not finished. After you call Jessica, you're going to write a check to cover every penny you spent on your affair. Hotel rooms, dinners, jewelry, whatever you bought her with our money. You're going to deposit that money back into our joint account." David was staring at me as if he'd never seen me before. "And then what?" "Then you're going to move back into our bedroom, and we're going to work on our marriage. Really work on it. Counseling, date nights, whatever it takes. You're going to put the same effort into fixing us that you put into hiding from me." "And if I don't?" I smiled. "Then I file for divorce tomorrow morning, and Sarah Morrison presents every piece of evidence I've gathered to a judge who won't be nearly as understanding as I'm being right now. You'll lose half of everything you've worked for, plus you'll pay spousal support based on the lifestyle you've been funding for your girlfriend. Oh, and did I mention that Jessica's ex-husband specifically included an infidelity clause in their divorce decree? He still has standing to sue for emotional distress. Imagine how that will play out when he sees these photos." David's phone was still in his hands. He looked down at it, then back at me. "You've thought of everything," he said. "It's what I do." He dialed Jessica's number. 3 months later, we went to counseling. Dr. Patricia Hendricks, a marriage therapist with 30 years of experience and a no-nonsense approach to infidelity recovery. David confessed everything: the timeline, the lies, the money, the things he'd said about me in his emails. I sat in her beige office and listened to my husband itemize his betrayal with the same thoroughness he brought to legal briefs. Dr. Hendricks asked me how I felt about David's confession. Informed, I said. "That's not an emotion, Claire. It's the only one that matters." The truth was, I felt many things. Angry, certainly. Hurt, definitely. But more than anything, I felt powerful. I felt like someone who'd taken control of her own story, instead of letting someone else write the ending. David, for his part, seemed genuinely surprised by the intensity of his own guilt. He'd expected me to scream, to cry, to make scenes. He'd prepared for emotional chaos. What he hadn't prepared for was strategic forgiveness, the kind that came with conditions and consequences. "I don't understand how you can be so calm about this," he said during one session. "Because being calm doesn't mean I've forgiven you," I replied. "It means I'm choosing my response instead of letting my emotions choose for me." Dr. Hendricks smiled. "Claire, you seem to have a very clear sense of what you want from this process." "I want accountability," I said. "I want transparency. I want David to prove that I can trust him again, not just believe that I should." 6 months later, David has been sleeping in our bedroom for 4 months now. He gives me his passwords, shows me his phone whenever I ask, accounts for his time with the precision of someone who understands that trust is earned in increments. He's been punctual, honest, and appropriately contrite. But I still don't love him. This is the part that surprises me. Not that I'm still hurt, but that I'm not sure I want to heal. The woman who married David 16 years ago believed that love was supposed to conquer everything, that good intentions could overcome any betrayal, that marriage was about forgiveness and second chances. The woman I've become understands that love is a choice. And David spent 9 months choosing someone else. I'm not the same person who used to make his coffee in the mornings and ask about his day. I'm someone who verified his alibi when he said he was working late last Tuesday. I'm someone who checks our credit card statements every week. Not because I don't trust him, but because I've learned that trust is a luxury I can't afford. David notices the change. "You're different," he says sometimes. Yes, I agree. I am. "Do you think you'll ever forgive me? Really forgive me?" It's a fair question. The David I married was someone I trusted completely, someone I never doubted, someone I believed would never hurt me intentionally. The David probably deserved forgiveness. But the David is gone, replaced by someone who proved capable of systematic deception. Someone who could waste a lie to my face for 9 months while conducting an affair with my money. "I don't know," I tell him, and I mean it. 1 year later, I'm standing in Dr. Hendricks' office for what will be our last session. David and I have been coming here every Tuesday for 12 months, working through his betrayal with the methodical attention we might give to a complicated legal case. "You've both made significant progress," Dr. Hendricks says. "David has demonstrated genuine accountability, and Claire, you've shown remarkable strength in your willingness to rebuild." David reaches for my hand. I let him take it, but I don't squeeze back. "The question now," Dr. Hendricks continues, "is whether you want to stay married to each other, or whether you've learned what you needed to learn." David looks at me with the hopeful expression of someone who spent a year atoning for his mistakes. He's been a model husband since his confession, attentive, honest, eager to please. He brings me coffee in the morning, sends thoughtful text messages, remembers anniversaries he'd forgotten when he was distracted by Jessica. But I've realized something over these 12 months of counseling and rebuilding. I don't want to be married to someone who needs surveillance to stay faithful. I don't want to love someone who requires monitoring to remain honest. I don't want a marriage that exists because I built a case strong enough to win it. I think, I say carefully, that we've learned we're different people than we were when we got married. David's face falls. Are you saying you want a divorce? I'm saying I want a marriage with someone who chooses me every day. Not someone who chooses me because the alternative is too expensive. Dr. Hendricks nods. That's a very mature distinction, Claire. I've learned to make mature distinctions. 2 years later, I signed the divorce papers on a Tuesday in November. David and I split our assets according to the post-nuptial agreement we'd negotiated during counseling. Fair, equitable, and considerably more generous than what he would have received if I'd filed immediately after discovering the affair. He moved to Denver 3 months later. A fresh start, he called it. I heard through mutual friends that he and Jessica had reconnected, that they were talking about marriage. I felt nothing when I learned this. Not anger, not vindication, not even relief. Just the mild curiosity you might feel reading about strangers in the newspaper. I kept our house, the one with the bay window and the marble countertops. I refinanced the mortgage, painted the guest room where David had slept during our separation, and converted it into a home office. I got a promotion at Morrison & Associates, specializing now in divorce litigation. Apparently, I have a talent for building cases that protect women who've been betrayed by men they trusted. My sister Rachel asked me once if I regretted staying with David for that year of counseling, if I wished I'd filed for divorce immediately after confronting him. No, I told her. I needed to know who I was after the marriage ended. I needed to know that I chose to leave, not that he forced me out. I've been dating again recently. A federal prosecutor named Michael, who understands that trust is something you build deliberately, not something you assume automatically. He makes me laugh in the way David used to, before David started making other people laugh instead. But the best part of my new life is the peace. I sleep well now, without wondering where my partner really is, or whom he's really thinking about. I check my phone without fear, open my mail without anxiety, plan my future without needing to account for someone else's secrets. I learned that revenge isn't about destroying the person who hurt you. It's about refusing to let their choices destroy you. It's about taking back control of your own story and writing an ending that serves your dignity instead of their convenience. David taught me that some betrayals can't be forgiven, only survived. But he also taught me that survival can look like victory if you're strategic enough about how you do it. And I am nothing if not strategic.